Your sister's wedding was perfect, Mom beamed. When will it be your turn? I smiled. It already happened. You just weren't there. The whole room froze. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I finally got back at the people who spent years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. Growing up as the younger daughter in the Mitchell family meant living in my sister Jessica's shadow. She was 3 years older, naturally beautiful, effortlessly popular, and according to my parents, absolutely perfect in every way. I was the awkward one with frizzy hair, braces that lasted way too long, and a tendency to prefer books over parties. My parents, Linda and Robert Mitchell, never bothered hiding their favoritism. Jessica got a new car for her 16th birthday while I got a lecture about responsibility when I asked for driving lessons. She received a full ride to her dream college, while I worked 2 jobs to pay for community college. When Jessica announced her engagement to her college sweetheart Marcus, my parents immediately offered to pay for the entire wedding. When I mentioned dating someone seriously, my mother would make passive-aggressive comments about how I should focus on bettering myself first. After 25 years of being treated like the less important daughter, the breaking point came when I met David Chen, a pediatric nurse who worked at the Children's Hospital downtown. He was kind, funny, and saw something in me that my family apparently never could. We fell in love quickly and deeply. After dating for 18 months, David proposed during a quiet weekend getaway to the mountains. It wasn't flashy or Instagram-worthy, just the 2 of us, a beautiful sunset, and the most heartfelt proposal I could have imagined. When I called my parents to share the news, their reaction was underwhelming, to put it mildly. "Oh honey, that's nice," my mother said in that tone she used when she was clearly distracted. "Are you sure you're ready for marriage though? You're still figuring out your career, and well, you know how these things can be." My father's response was even worse. "Maybe you should wait until Jessica's wedding is over. We don't want to steal her thunder, do we?" Steal her thunder? Jessica's wedding was still 8 months away. But this was typical behavior from my parents. Everything revolved around Jessica and her perfect life. The months leading up to Jessica's wedding were a nightmare. Every family gathering became a Jessica appreciation session. My mother would spend hours showing me Pinterest boards of Jessica's wedding plans, gushing about the venue, the dress, the flowers, everything. Meanwhile, whenever I tried to mention my own engagement, the conversation would quickly shift back to Jessica or die out entirely. The final straw came at Jessica's bridal shower, which my mother insisted I help plan despite being given no real input on any decisions. I was relegated to menial tasks like addressing invitations and picking up decorations, while my mother and Jessica made all the important choices together. During the shower, my Aunt Margaret asked me when David and I were planning to tie the knot. "Oh, Sarah's not ready for marriage yet," my mother interrupted before I could answer. "She's still finding herself. Jessica has always been more mature about these things." Jessica just smiled and said nothing, which somehow made it worse than if she had been outright cruel. That night, I went home to David and cried for 2 hours. He held me while I vented about my family's treatment, how they made me feel invisible and unimportant. That's when David suggested something that would change everything. "What if we just did it?" he said quietly. "What if we got married without telling them?" At first, I thought he was joking. But the more we talked about it, the more appealing the idea became. Why should we wait for my family's approval or permission? Why should our happiness be put on hold for Jessica's perfect timeline? Over the next few weeks, we planned our secret wedding. We decided on a small ceremony at the botanical gardens across town, with just David's parents, his sister Amy, my best friend from college Rebecca, and her husband Tom as witnesses. David's family was thrilled and immediately embraced me as their own daughter. The contrast between their warmth and my family's coldness was stark. We hired a local photographer named Maria Santos who specialized in intimate weddings. The florist, an elderly woman named Rose who ran a small shop downtown, created the most beautiful bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus. My dress came from a boutique that specialized in simple, elegant gowns. It wasn't expensive or elaborate, but when I put it on, I felt like the most beautiful woman in the world. The ceremony took place on a sunny Saturday morning on April 13th, exactly 2 months before Jessica's wedding. David's father, a retired minister, officiated. There wasn't a dry eye in the small group as David and I exchanged vows we had written ourselves. His promise to love me exactly as I am, never trying to change me or make someone else's idea of perfect. Mine promised to build a life together based on mutual respect and genuine partnership, not competition or comparison. After the ceremony, we had a small lunch at David's favorite restaurant, an Italian place that had been family-owned for 3 generations. The owner, Giuseppe, had known David since he was a child and insisted on preparing a special meal for us. We laughed, told stories, and celebrated with people who truly cared about our happiness. For our honeymoon, we took a week-long road trip to national parks in Utah and Colorado. No fancy resort or exotic destination, just the two of us exploring beautiful places and enjoying our new marriage. It was perfect in every way that mattered. When we returned, we decided to keep the marriage secret until after Jessica's wedding. We didn't want to create drama or give my parents ammunition to blame us for ruining Jessica's big day. We moved in together, telling my family we were just taking the next step in our relationship. My parents barely acknowledged this milestone. Jessica's wedding planning intensified as the date approached. My mother called me daily with updates about dress fittings, menu tastings, and flower arrangements. She expected me to be available for every emergency and breakdown, despite having shown zero interest in my own life. I played along, all while secretly wearing my wedding ring on a chain under my clothes. The week leading up to Jessica's wedding was absolutely chaotic. My mother transformed into what I can only describe as a wedding general, barking orders at vendors, family members, and anyone within a 10-foot radius. She called me at 7 in the morning 3 days before the wedding, practically hyperventilating because the florist had delivered the wrong shade of pink roses. "Sarah, you need to drive to the flower shop right now and fix this," she demanded. "Jessica will have a breakdown if everything isn't perfect." I looked at David, who was making us breakfast before his shift at the hospital. He raised his eyebrows sympathetically as I mouthed flower emergency at him. "Mom, I have to work today," I replied. "Can't you handle this yourself?" "I'm too busy with the caterer," she snapped. "Your sister's wedding is this weekend, Sarah. This is important." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a married woman, being sent on errands for my sister's wedding while my own marriage remained a secret. I spent my lunch break driving across town to argue with a florist about the difference between blush pink and dusty rose roses, all while my wedding ring hung hidden under my work blouse. The rehearsal dinner was held at an expensive steakhouse downtown. I watched my parents fawn over Marcus's family, who were lovely people but clearly uncomfortable with the over-the-top display of wealth my parents were putting on. Marcus's mother, Patricia, was a kindergarten teacher, and his father, James, worked as an electrician. They were genuine, down-to-earth people who seemed bewildered by the crystal stemware and gold-plated charger plates my mother had insisted upon. During dinner, my father stood up to give a speech about Jessica and Marcus's love story. He talked about how proud he was of Jessica for finding such a wonderful man, how Marcus was lucky to be marrying into our family, and how this wedding represented everything they had hoped for their daughter. The speech went on for nearly 10 minutes, covering Jessica's accomplishments, her beauty, her perfect grades in college, and her successful marketing career. When he finished, several people turned to look at me expectantly, assuming I would give a speech as the maid of honor. But my father simply sat down, apparently having said everything he wanted to say about his daughters. The moment passed awkwardly until Marcus stood up to thank everyone for coming. Later that evening, Patricia Chen approached me during the cocktail hour. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I feel like I've barely heard anything about you tonight. David talks about you constantly when we see him at family gatherings, and he clearly adores you. I'd love to hear more about your work and your interests." The kindness in her voice almost brought me to tears. Here was a woman I had met only hours earlier, showing more interest in my life than my own parents had in months. We spent 20 minutes talking about my job at the local library, my volunteer work with adult literacy programs, and my photography hobby. She listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like my life mattered. "David is lucky to have found someone so passionate and caring," she said warmly. "I can tell you two are very happy together. If only she knew how right she was, and how recently we had made that happiness official." The morning of Jessica's wedding dawned bright and clear, which my mother took as a personal sign from the universe that everything was meant to be perfect. She had booked a suite at the country club for the bridal party to get ready, complete with a professional makeup artist, hairstylist, and photographer to capture every moment of Jessica's preparation. I arrived at 8 in the morning to find Jessica already in full preparation mode, sitting in a plush white robe while the makeup artist worked on her face. The room buzzed with activity as bridesmaids chatted, my mother directed the photographer, and various vendors came and went with last-minute details. "Sarah, finally?" my mother exclaimed when she saw me. "The photographer wants to get some shots of you helping Jessica with her jewelry. Can you put her necklace on her?" I dutifully fastened the diamond necklace around Jessica's neck, a family heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. As I worked with the clasp, Jessica caught my eye in the mirror. "You know, I always imagined we'd be doing this together someday," she said quietly. "Getting ready for our weddings, helping each other with our dresses." For a moment, She sounded like the sister I remembered from childhood, before the competition and favoritism had created such distance between us. I almost told her then about my own wedding, about how beautiful it had been to have David's sister Amy help me with my dress, how we had laughed and cried together in the small bridal suite at the Botanical Gardens. But then my mother appeared with the photographer, positioning us for a series of candid shots, and the moment passed. The ceremony preparations were a masterclass in orchestrated perfection. My mother had hired a wedding coordinator, Elena Rodriguez, who managed the timeline with military precision. Every bridesmaid knew exactly when to walk down the aisle, how slowly to move, and where to stand. The groomsmen had been drilled on their positions and cues. Even the flower girl and ring bearer had been through multiple practice sessions. As we lined up outside the ceremony space, I caught sight of David in his seat. He looked handsome in his navy suit, and when our eyes met, he smiled and touched his chest where I knew he kept his wedding ring on a chain, just like I did. That small gesture reminded me that I wasn't alone in this performance, that I had someone who truly loved and supported me. The wedding ceremony was undeniably beautiful, if you enjoyed that sort of elaborate production. The venue was an upscale country club, with cascading white flowers, crystal chandeliers, and enough champagne to float a boat. Jessica looked stunning in her designer gown, and Marcus was handsome in his custom tuxedo. The guest list included over 200 people, most of whom barely knew the couple but were important for networking or social status. I served as a bridesmaid, wearing a pale pink dress that cost more than my entire wedding outfit. During the ceremony, I couldn't help but compare it to my own. Jessica's was elaborate and impressive, but mine had been filled with love and genuine emotion. I knew which one I preferred. The ceremony was undeniably beautiful, if you enjoyed that sort of elaborate production. The processional alone took nearly 10 minutes, with each bridesmaid walking down the petal-strewn aisle at the pace of a funeral march. The officiant, a family friend who had known Jessica since childhood, gave a lengthy sermon about marriage that felt more like a performance for the assembled crowd than a spiritual moment between two people in love. During the vows, Jessica and Marcus recited words they had written together with help from a professional wedding speech writer. They were polished and romantic, full of references to destiny and fairy tales. As I stood behind Jessica holding her bouquet, I couldn't help but remember my own vows to David, stumbling over words as I tried to express emotions too big for language, tears streaming down my face as I promised to love him through whatever life brought us. The reception that followed was even more elaborate than the ceremony. The country club's ballroom had been transformed into what my mother called a romantic garden paradise, with thousands of roses, strings of fairy lights, and enough candles to illuminate a small city. Each table was set with gold-rimmed china, crystal glasses, and centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. I was seated at the head table between Jessica's college roommate Amanda and our cousin Jennifer, both of whom spent the entire cocktail hour discussing their own relationship drama. Amanda was in the middle of a messy divorce from her husband of 3 years, while Jennifer was dating a man her parents disapproved of because he was a chef rather than a lawyer or doctor. "At least you don't have to worry about any of that yet," Jennifer said to me during the salad course. "You're smart to take your time and really figure out what you want before settling down." I nearly choked on my wine. If she only knew that I had already figured out exactly what I wanted and had married him 2 months ago in a ceremony that felt more authentic than this entire production. The dinner service took over 2 hours, with multiple courses and wine pairings that the sommelier explained in excruciating detail. My parents had spared no expense, hiring a 5-star catering company that specialized in elevated dining experiences. The food was undeniably delicious, but I found myself thinking about the simple Italian lunch David and I had shared after our wedding ceremony, where Giuseppe had served us his grandmother's recipe for osso buco and refused to let us pay because love should be celebrated with the best food and the biggest hearts. During the meal, various family members and friends stood up to give toasts. Jessica's college friends shared amusing stories about her dating adventures before Marcus. Marcus's best man recounted their friendships since childhood. My Uncle Robert told embarrassing stories about Jessica as a little girl that made everyone laugh. Even Marcus's shy younger brother managed a sweet speech about gaining a sister. When it came time for the traditional maid of honor toast, I stood up with my champagne glass, feeling the weight of my hidden wedding ring against my chest. I had spent days writing and rewriting this speech, trying to find words that were honest without being bitter, loving without being fake. "Jessica has always been the kind of person who knows what she wants and goes after it," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "She's never been afraid to dream big or to work hard to make those dreams come true. Marcus, you're getting someone who will challenge you to be your best self while loving you exactly as you are. And Jessica, you've found someone who sees all the wonderful things about you that the rest of us have always known were there." It was true, even if our relationship was complicated. Jessica was determined and ambitious, qualities I actually admired even when they overshadowed my own quieter strengths. The toast was well received, and Jessica mouthed thank you to me as I sat down. After dinner, the dancing began with Jessica and Marcus's first dance to At Last by Etta James. They moved together beautifully, having taken months of lessons to perfect their choreography. My parents watched from their table with tears in their eyes, and I could see my mother already planning the photo album page this moment would occupy. As the evening continued, I found myself observing the whole celebration with the detachment of an anthropologist studying wedding rituals. The cake-cutting ceremony where Jessica and Marcus fed each other small bites while the photographer captured every angle. The bouquet and garter toss traditions that seemed designed more for entertainment than any real romantic significance. The endless photo sessions with various combinations of family members and friends. What struck me most was how performative it all felt. Don't get me wrong, Jessica and Marcus were clearly in love and happy. But the wedding seemed to be as much about putting on a show for the guests as it was about celebrating their commitment to each other. Every moment was choreographed, every detail designed for maximum visual impact. I thought about my own wedding day, how David and I had spent the morning walking through the botanical gardens before our ceremony, talking quietly about our hopes for our marriage. How we had written our vows separately and surprised each other with words that came straight from our hearts. How David's nephew, who was 8 years old, had served as our ring bearer and kept whispering loudly during the ceremony about how pretty my dress was. Our photographer, Maria, had captured beautiful moments, but they were unstaged and genuine. David wiping tears from my eyes during our vows. Me laughing as his father stumbled slightly over the words of the ceremony. The spontaneous group hug that happened after we were pronounced husband and wife. These weren't moments designed for social media or family photo albums, they were real emotions shared between people who cared about each other. Around 10 o'clock, the party was in full swing. The band my parents had hired was playing a mix of classic love songs and contemporary hits that kept the dance floor packed. Jessica had changed from her ceremony dress into a shorter, more comfortable reception dress that made it easier to dance. She looked radiant and happy, spinning around the dance floor with Marcus, then with my father, then with various family members and friends. I danced a few obligatory dances with relatives and family friends, making small talk about my job and my relationship with David. Everyone seemed to assume we would be engaged soon, and I smiled noncommittally while my wedding ring pressed against my chest like a secret waiting to be revealed. David and I managed to steal a few dances together, including a slow song where he whispered in my ear, "How are you holding up, Mrs. Chen?" Hearing him call me by my married name in the middle of my sister's wedding reception was surreal and thrilling. "Just a few more hours," I whispered back. "Then we can go home and I can wear my ring where it belongs." The most difficult part of the evening was watching my parents. They were in their element, playing the role of proud hosts with obvious joy. My mother had changed into 3 different outfits throughout the day, each more elaborate than the last. My father had loosened up after several glasses of champagne and was telling anyone who would listen about how proud he was of Jessica and how lucky Marcus was to join their family. During a quiet moment, I overheard my mother talking to her sister Margaret about Jessica's future plans. "They're thinking about starting a family in a year or 2, she said, her voice bright with anticipation. "Can you imagine how beautiful their children will be? And Marcus has such good family genes, smart, successful, handsome." I wondered if my mother would ever speak about my future children with the same enthusiasm, or if they would always be secondary to Jessica's offspring and her affections. The thought made my chest tight with a familiar mixture of sadness and anger. As the evening wore on, I began to feel a strange sense of anticipation building inside me. I knew that in a few short hours, I would have the opportunity to share my own news with this room full of people who had spent years treating me as Jessica's less interesting younger sister. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Around 11:30, Jessica announced that it was time for the bouquet toss. All the single women were called to gather on the dance floor, and I reluctantly joined the group. I had been dreading this moment, knowing that my mother would inevitably make comments about when it would be my turn to catch the bouquet and find my own happiness. The other single women in the group ranged from Jessica's teenage cousins to some of her college friends who were still navigating the dating world in their late 20s. They chatted excitedly about the tradition, some joking about not wanting to be next while others clearly hoped to catch the flowers. Jessica positioned herself with her back to us, holding the elaborate bouquet that had been created specifically for tossing, a smaller version of her bridal bouquet made with white roses, baby's breath, and trailing ribbons. The photographer and videographer positioned themselves to capture the moment from multiple angles. "Are you ready, ladies?" Jessica called out, raising the bouquet above her head. The group of women crouched slightly, arms outstretched, ready to compete for the symbolic flowers. I stood in the back, not particularly interested in participating in what felt like a performance of desperation. But as Jessica prepared to throw the bouquet, I found myself thinking about the irony of the situation. Here I was, pretending to be single and hoping for love, when I was already married to the most wonderful man in the room. The flowers sailed through the air in a perfect arc, and through what could only be described as cosmic irony, they landed directly in my hands. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and someone shouted, "Sarah's next." I stood there holding the bouquet, feeling the weight of the moment settling around me. This was it, the setup I had been unconsciously waiting for all evening. My mother materialized at my side, her face glowing with alcohol and excitement. "Your sister's wedding was perfect," Mom beamed, her voice carrying across the quieting room. "When will it be your turn?" This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I looked at David, who was standing near the bar with an encouraging smile. I took a deep breath, reached into the small hidden pocket I had specifically requested in my bridesmaid dress, and pulled out my wedding ring, slipping it onto my finger where it belonged. It already happened. You just weren't there. The whole room froze. My mother's smile faltered, confusion replacing her earlier joy. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I held up my hand, showing the wedding ring that now sat proudly on my finger. David and I got married on April 13th. We had a beautiful ceremony at the Botanical Gardens with people who actually care about us. The silence was deafening. Jessica's mouth fell open, still holding her empty hands where the bouquet had been. My father's face went through several color changes before settling on an angry red. Other guests began whispering among themselves, phones appearing as people tried to process this unexpected drama. "You're joking," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not at all," I replied, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "We have photos, a marriage certificate, everything." It was a lovely ceremony. Small but meaningful. The kind of wedding two people have when they're focused on marriage rather than a party. Jessica finally found her voice. "Why didn't you tell us? Why would you do this?" I turned to face my sister, this person who had unknowingly been the center of my family's universe for 28 years. "When exactly should I have told you? During one of your dress fittings that I wasn't invited to? At your bridal shower where Mom told everyone I wasn't ready for marriage? Or maybe during one of the dozens of family dinners where every conversation was about your perfect relationship and your perfect wedding plans?" My mother looked stricken. "Sarah, we would have. We wanted to be there for you." "Did you though?" I asked, my voice getting stronger. "Because I've been trying to share my life with this family for years, and there's never been room for anyone except Jessica. When I got engaged, Dad told me to wait until after Jessica's wedding because we didn't want to steal her thunder. When I mentioned wedding ideas, you changed the subject. When I tried to talk about David, you gave me lectures about focusing on my career instead." The crowd was definitely listening now, though most people were pretending to examine their phones or the centerpieces. Marcus had moved to Jessica's side, looking uncomfortable and confused. My father stepped forward, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is hardly the time or place for this discussion, Sarah." "Isn't it though?" I replied. "This is a celebration of marriage and family, right? I'm just sharing my happy news with everyone. Unless, of course, you're embarrassed that your younger daughter got married without needing a $50,000 party to prove her worth." That hit home. My father's jaw clenched, and my mother looked like she might cry. David approached and took my hand. "Maybe we should go," he said quietly. "Good idea," I agreed. I turned back to the room, many of whom were still staring. "Thank you all for helping us celebrate. It's been enlightening." The fallout from my revelation was immediate and dramatic. The room, which had been filled with celebration and laughter just moments before, fell into the kind of silence you usually only hear in libraries or funeral homes. I could see people processing what I had said, some confused, others shocked, a few clearly delighted by the unexpected drama. Jessica's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally anger. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" she hissed, her voice low but carrying across the quiet room. "At my wedding?" "I'm just answering Mom's question," I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. My heart was pounding, but outwardly I felt more composed than I had all day. She asked when it would be my turn, and I told her the truth. My father stepped forward, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Sarah, this is completely inappropriate. We need to discuss this privately." "Why?" I asked. "This is a celebration of marriage and family, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy to learn that I'm married to a wonderful man who loves me unconditionally." The last part was aimed directly at my parents, and from their expressions, it hit home. Around us, I could see Guests pulling out their phones, some probably texting other family members, others likely documenting the drama for social media. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. "Sarah, honey, you can't be serious. When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" "I told you," I said, my voice getting stronger. "You just weren't there. We got married on April 15th at the Botanical Gardens. It was a beautiful ceremony with people who actually wanted to celebrate our happiness." David appeared at my side, his presence giving me courage to continue. "My husband David and I decided to have a small, intimate wedding focused on our commitment to each other rather than impressing a bunch of people who barely know us." The word husband seemed to hit my family like a physical blow. Jessica actually took a step backward, nearly tripping over her elaborate train. "You've been lying to us for months," my father said, his voice tight with anger. "How could you deceive your family like this?" "Deceive you?" I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "Like when you told Aunt Margaret that I wasn't ready for marriage at Jessica's bridal shower? Or when you suggested I wait to get engaged so I wouldn't steal Jessica's thunder? When exactly was I supposed to share my news with a family that made it clear my life wasn't as important as my sister's?" More phones appeared around the room. I could see my cousin Rachel recording everything, probably for the family members who weren't present. My uncle Robert looked like he was torn between intervening and enjoying the drama. Jessica finally found her voice again. "So what, you decided to ruin my wedding because you're jealous? Because you couldn't stand having one day not be about you?" That stung, but I wasn't backing down now. "This isn't about you, Jessica. This is about me finally standing up for myself after 25 years of being treated like the consolation prize daughter." "That's not fair," my mother protested, tears starting to flow down her carefully made-up cheeks. "We love you both equally." "Do you?" I challenged. "When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When did you last ask about my job, my hobbies, my relationship without immediately changing the subject to Jessica? When did you last act like my happiness mattered as much as hers?" The silence that followed was deafening. Around us, the wedding guests had formed a loose circle, some pretending to look away while clearly listening to every word. The band had stopped playing, and even the waitstaff had paused their cleanup to watch the unfolding family drama. Marcus, who had been standing frozen beside Jessica, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should take this conversation somewhere private?" "Why?" I asked. "So you can all gang up on me and tell me how selfish I'm being? So you can make me feel guilty for finally speaking up about how I've been treated? I don't think so." I turned to address the room at large, feeling reckless and liberated. "I want everyone to know that David and I had a beautiful wedding ceremony 2 months ago. We exchanged vows we wrote ourselves, surrounded by people who love and support us. It was small but perfect, and I wouldn't change a single thing about it." Some of the older guests looked scandalized, but I noticed that several of the younger family members were nodding approvingly. My cousin Rachel had stopped recording and was actually smiling at me. Even some of Jessica's friends looked impressed by my boldness. David squeezed my hand. "Sarah, maybe we should go home now," he said quietly. I nodded, suddenly feeling exhausted by the confrontation. The adrenaline that had carried me through my revelation was starting to fade, and I realized I was trembling slightly. "Congratulations on a beautiful wedding, Jessica," I said, my voice softer now. "I hope you and Marcus have a wonderful marriage." "I really do." Jessica stared at me for a long moment, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I can't believe you did this," she whispered. "I can't believe it took me this long," I replied. As David and I walked toward the exit, I could hear the whispers starting behind us, voices rising as people began to process what had just happened. My phone was already buzzing with text messages and missed calls. "How do you feel?" David asked as we reached his car. I thought about it for a moment, taking deep breaths of the cool evening air. "Free," I said finally. "Scared, but free." The drive home was quiet, both of us lost in thought about what had just transpired. I kept playing the scene over in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there had been a better way to make my point. But then I remembered my mother's face when she asked about my turn, the casual assumption that I was still waiting for my life to begin while Jessica lived her perfect fairy tale. I remembered all the years of feeling invisible, all the times my achievements had been overlooked or minimized. Maybe my approach hadn't been perfect, but it had been honest. When we got home, I finally took the ring off the chain where I had been hiding it and confirmed it was back where it belonged on my finger. David did the same, and for the first time in 2 months, we looked like what we actually were, a married couple. "No more hiding," I said, admiring how the ring caught the light. "No more hiding," David agreed, pulling me into his arms. "Though I have a feeling tomorrow is going to be interesting." He was right. My phone rang constantly for the next 3 days, with calls from family members, family friends, and people I hadn't spoken to in years who had heard about the drama through the extended family network. Some were supportive, others were critical, and a few were just calling for gossip. The most painful calls came from my immediate family. My mother left 17 voicemails, her tone cycling between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Jessica sent a series of text messages that grew increasingly hostile as I didn't respond immediately. My father, true to form, didn't contact me directly but had my mother relay his disappointment in my attention-seeking behavior. But there were positive responses too. My Aunt Margaret called to congratulate me and tell me she was proud of me for standing up for myself. Several cousins reached out to say they had always noticed the difference in how my parents treated Jessica and me. Even some of Jessica's friends contacted me to say they thought what I did took courage. The most surprising support came from David's family. When they learned what had happened at the reception, they were horrified by how my family had treated me over the years. Helen Chen called to apologize for not realizing how difficult things were for me and to invite me to their family gatherings anytime I needed people who appreciated me. "You're our daughter now too," she said warmly. "And we're so glad David found someone as strong and wonderful as you." 3 weeks after Jessica's wedding, my parents asked to meet with David and me. We agreed to have dinner at a neutral restaurant, not wanting to deal with the emotional weight of meeting at their house. The conversation was awkward and painful. My mother cried multiple times, insisting she had no idea I felt so excluded from the family. My father maintained that I had handled the situation poorly and embarrassed everyone involved. Neither of them seemed to truly understand why I had felt the need to keep my wedding secret. "We just wanted Jessica to have her perfect day," my mother kept repeating. "And what about my perfect day?" I finally asked. "Did it ever occur to either of you that I might want a family who cared about my happiness too?" The dinner ended without resolution, though my parents did ask to see our wedding photos. I showed them a few on my phone, watching their faces as they saw how happy and radiant I looked surrounded by people who loved me. 6 months later, my relationship with my family remains complicated. My mother makes more effort to include me in family conversations, though she still tends to focus primarily on Jessica. My father speaks to me cordially but without warmth. Jessica and I have an uneasy truce, but we've never been close, and this situation hasn't improved that dynamic. The extended family has mostly moved on, though I still get comments at gatherings about my surprise wedding. Some relatives think what I did was petty and dramatic, while others believe it was long overdue. I've learned not to care too much about their opinions. David and I are happier than ever. We bought a small house with a garden where we host dinner parties for friends who feel like chosen family. We've talked about having children, and I'm grateful they'll grow up knowing they're wanted and valued for exactly who they are. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently, if there was a way to make my point without creating such a public scene. But then I remember all the years of feeling invisible and unimportant, all the times my feelings were dismissed or ignored. Maybe my approach wasn't perfect, but it was honest. My family spent years teaching me that I didn't matter as much as Jessica, that my achievements were less important, that my happiness was secondary to maintaining their image of the perfect family. They created the situation where I felt the need to hide such an important milestone. The truth is, I don't regret my secret wedding. It was beautiful and meaningful, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about David and me as individuals. I don't regret revealing it at Jessica's reception either. After 28 years of being treated as the less important daughter, I finally found my voice. These days, when people ask about my family's situation, I tell them honestly that we're working on it. Some relationships can be repaired, and some just need to be redefined. I'm learning that I can't control how my parents choose to see me, but I can control how much power I give their opinions over my life. David and I are building our own family traditions now, ones based on mutual respect and genuine love rather than favoritism and competition. We host holidays for friends who don't have family nearby, volunteer together at the children's hospital, and make decisions as equal partners. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't always about the dramatic moment of revelation. Sometimes it's about building a life so good that you don't need anyone else's approval to validate it. But I have to admit, seeing the shocked faces in that reception hall was pretty satisfying too. My wedding ring sits proudly on my finger now, no longer hidden on the chain. It's not as expensive or elaborate as Jessica's, but it represents something more valuable, a marriage built on love, respect, and the knowledge that I am enough, exactly as I am. That, more than any revenge plot, is the real victory.